Thanks, you guys. That was awesome. Hi, my name is Hayden Davison. Bear with me today. This is my first time teaching in the round, so I will try not to run laps around the stage, and I'll try to get to each point and corner. Okay, so today, my name is Hayden Davison. I am children's pastor here at the church, and so to open my lesson today, I have a question just for 5th grade and under. All right? And I have Kat and Lydia. Where are you guys? Raise your hands. All right. They're going to be running around the room and finding kids to answer the question. So kids, I need you to focus. This is really important. What if you could draft your own super team? All right. But this is the specific scenario, the type of team you need to draft. Is this off? Is this on? Hello? Hello? Oh, no. Go back. I ruined the surprise. All right, we're going to go back and start over. Just pretend you didn't see that. Just wipe that. Okay, so kids, you are the front of this boat. There are 8 other people you need to pick to row in this boat. The person in the front does what? Anybody shout it out. They call out, they stroke or row, right? They call it, they set the rhythm, they set the pace. So you need to pick 8 people to put in your boat. And here's the catch. Godzilla is chasing you across the lake. So what are the type of things you're going to look for in a rowing team if you have to outrow depending on which era Godzilla, 30-foot or like 50-story monster chasing you across the lake? And for you Godzilla fans out there, I did use the Showa era audio bite with the modern image, but we're just going to roll with it, okay? All right. Anyway, so kids, go. What are the attributes you would look for? Who would you want to row this boat for you?
So I would pick Hayden for the front because he's
No, you're in the front.
Loud. And then I would pick a couple of my friends and my family.
What attributes about them would you want them in the boat for?
Because first, Hayden's very loud.
I am very loud.
And then my family is encouraging, and then my friends are just fun.
Okay, sweet. Encouraging, fun, loud.
Nice strategy.
I would pick somebody who can focus and can watch carefully for how I'm steering the boat.
Okay, yeah, focus, careful, helps her steer the boat. Deal. Anybody else?
I would pick people who are really fast at rowing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, people who've done this before. All right, that's fair.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I would pick my dad to be in front.
Why'd you pick your dad?
Because he's strong.
Because he's strong. Yeah, all right. Okay, so now I have another question. Now that we've picked our rowing team, we've successfully raced Godzilla across the lake. I don't know how that saves us from him because, he's a big giant lizard. He's not bound by the lake, but we're just going to move on. We're going to pretend like that doesn't matter.
He got bored.
He got bored. Yeah. So what attributes do you think Jesus looked for when he was picking the disciples? Brownie points if you can tell me, for the kids, the name of the painting and who painted it. Little art history lesson mixed in. What do you think? There's no wrong answers here because I'm asking this question because we're going to dive in and we're going to answer that question maybe. We'll see. Anybody? Adults in the room, you can jump in too now if no kids want to answer.
Michelangelo?
This is Da Vinci. Oh, Da Vinci. Yeah, Da Vinci. Last Supper. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, and then preferred to be thought of as a sculptor more than a painter. The Pope kind of strong-armed him into painting the Sistine Chapel, but that's a history lesson for another day. What?
Yeah. What attributes?
Yes, what attributes was Jesus looking for?
I'm his wife. I can steer him back around.
Anybody? Like I said, kids, there's no wrong answers. What would you look for if you were picking disciples yourself? Loyalty? All right, I heard loyalty. Leadership? Kindness. Heart. Sorry, I can't. Integrity, yes. Teachability.
Oh, thanks, honey.
I'm pacing. Oh, slow.
Helpful.
Helpful. All right. Well, we are going to dive in to the history, to the story of how Jesus called the disciples, specifically 2 of them. I'll get to that. And we will see if some of these attributes are the things that Jesus was looking for, or what Jesus was looking for specifically in the calling of the disciples. But before we dive into that, we get to discuss the very, very exciting world of the early first century Jewish education system. Woo! That was a way better response than I thought I was going to get for that intro. I thought I was going to have to be way more sarcastic. But so as I was studying for this section, I actually feel like I unlearned more than I learned. I had a lot of preconceived notions about what this looked like, and what I learned was the early first century Jewish education system is a strangely hot, contested topic in the world of history. There is active, lively debates about what this looked like. Who knew? But I'm going to bring pieces to you that I am very, very confident are accurate and have a general agreement among scholars today. So first off, when we're looking at the way that the disciples and the people in Jesus' time would have been educated, we have to look at their geographic location. So the disciples were largely from the area of Galilee, which is where Jesus spent the majority of his life growing up. He moved there from Egypt when he was about 2 or 3. And so he is Jesus of Nazareth in the Galilee region. So Galilee probably had more synagogues and a better education system than other parts of the country. A lot of scholars believe that because there is a disproportionate amount of famous rabbis or teachers that come from this region versus other regions. So comparatively, the disciples were probably fairly well educated for their time. All right? That leads me to my next point. Rabbi at the time was not an official title. Rabbi is a codified official title with a process to achieve it. Doesn't happen until 70 AD or CE, depending on whenever you graduated high school. I feel like they changed it on me in college. So there wasn't an official path to become a rabbi. Rabbi at the time was an honorific. It just meant somebody who was wise, teacher, and respected in their community as a teacher. Children, ages 5 to 10, and there's some debate around the age range, 6 to 11, 4 to 12, whatever. But within this range, they would attend something called Bet Sefer, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that exactly right, but it translates to the house of the book. And so this is when they would go to the synagogue, and they would be taught, they would memorize the Torah, they would learn about the scriptures, they would learn morals, they would learn basic mathematics, they would learn maybe some agricultural stuff. So this was just kind of the general catch-all. Think of it like an early elementary school. And they would attend this from ages 5 to 10. There was a teacher that was hired who would have been called rabbi, but again, not an official title, but they were hired by the synagogue, and this was their job. They taught this age of students. And so this is a program that most, if not all, of the children of the region would have gone through. There was also a heavy emphasis at this time at teaching at home. So a lot of the weight of the Torah teaching and morality teaching, and especially the trade that a man would go into or a woman would go into, well, not necessarily trade, but like the things that a woman would do in the culture, right? They would be taught that at home in conjunction with this and continued education afterwards. Next, if you decided that you wanted to become a rabbi or a teacher or achieve this, continue your theological studies, continue to learn more about the Torah and the scriptures, learn more about what it meant to share, and eventually step into this role of rabbi, right? You would do something. You would go and petition a rabbi. So this is a painting by Rembrandt called The Old Rabbi. You can tell it's a Rembrandt because of the way it is. But so you would go and you would actually, if you felt smart enough, if you felt wise enough, if this is a path you wanted to choose, you would actually select a rabbi, and you would approach the rabbi ask to be a disciple. The rabbi would then quiz you and ask you all these questions and poke and prod at you, and after a course of time, when he was satisfied with all of your answers or unsatisfied with your answers, he would either choose to take you on or kick you to the curb, right? He would choose to take you on as a disciple, or he would send you away. So this is the context that we find Jesus calling his disciples in. They were probably very well educated in the scriptures, especially for their time. The community, the culture was built entirely around, right, scripture and their faith and their belief. So even if they hadn't gone through these programs, probably had a pretty good solid knowledge of what they believed and what God said and prophecy and these things like that. They'd probably attended this age of school, and if they had wanted to be a rabbi, they either you had to go and petition, be a disciple, you had to go petition a rabbi, and he would take you on. Jesus took on 12, he took on more, but specifically 12 disciples. These were his core, these were his base, these are the guys he spent the most time with, and these guys that he put the most energy into. The 12, as listed in Matthew and Luke, are Simon Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, also called Nathaniel, Matthew, also called Levi, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas, son of James, also known as Thaddeus, and Judas Iscariot, who ultimately betrays Jesus and sends him to the cross, turns him over to the Romans. So this is the list. We don't know how all of them were called, but we do know how a few of them were called. We have that recorded in Scripture, and I want to focus on two of those stories today. First, I want to talk about Simon, called Peter, or Cephas in the Greek. The story of Simon's calling by Jesus is found in Matthew 4, Mark 1, and Luke 5, just to be thorough, right? We are going to focus just on the Luke 5 passage today. It says, deep breath. And when he had finished speaking, Jesus, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all day and night and took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help him. And they came and filled both boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So we've specifically talked about James and John, and Simon, called Peter. Andrew is also here. We know that from the other two accounts. But the things I want to point out specifically, we're going to focus in on Peter, right? This miraculous thing happens. Jesus, they've been suffering, they've been toiling, they've been trying to catch fish all day. They take a break. Jesus is preaching out of their boat. And he says, "Okay, all right, let's go do this again." And they haven't caught anything all day, but okay, Lord, okay, Master, we'll go and do it. They throw it out, and it's quite probably the biggest catch of their entire lives. And I think a lot of us would respond with, "Wow, like, thank you so much, Jesus. Like, this is so awesome. Which is definitely a good part. Like, that's not bad. This severe gratitude." But Peter responds in shame. "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." He does not feel worthy of the miracle, of the blessing that Jesus has brought to his boat, to his family, to his business. Peter does not think he's worthy of the miracle. He does not think he is worthy to be in the presence of this great teacher who he has yet to even learn is God. He does not feel worthy to be there. Jesus responds, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. And when they brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So Jesus immediately, it's almost like he doesn't even acknowledge it in a way. He's like, don't worry about that. Follow me. And they do. Quite possibly the biggest catch of his life, and he leaves it on the shore. He gets up and runs, and the others follow him. Peter was married, by the way. He just quit his profession without talking to his wife, which would not go over well. We know this because later it says that Jesus actually heals Peter's mother-in-law of a severe fever. But he drops everything and immediately follows Jesus. So what do we know from this passage? Simon Peter, he's a fisherman. Fisherman was not, so we've talked about, you probably heard in church that shepherd was a pretty lowly profession, kind of the bottom of the barrel, right? And priest or think of like Pilate, these kind of roles, these royalty, these high religious roles. These were kind of like the peak, right? Fisherman's kind of like in the middle. It wasn't like a highly respected job, but you weren't like super looked down on either. There weren't a ton of fishermen because, a lot of that is not, there's only a couple of bodies of water. So if you lived by the water, this was an option, right? So necessary in his community, brought in a lot of food, but he was probably a little rough, a little gruff, stank like fish all the time, which to all of you people who love fish, I'm coming around to eating it, but anytime anything smells or tastes like fish, that's not a compliment unless it's a fish, right? Just, but also something in his past, something about him, self-doubt, something he's done, the way he views himself, he does not feel worthy to be in the presence of Jesus, let alone follow Jesus. And interestingly enough, Jesus asks Peter to follow him. If you remember before, I talked about the way that you would become a disciple is you went and petitioned a rabbi to sit under them. But here we see Jesus defying the culture, doing it differently. He steps out and says, no, I want you to follow me. A guy who, if he'd ever had a dream to be a disciple under a rabbi, that was long gone. He wasn't, if he'd petitioned ever, and we don't know, but he wouldn't have been considered good enough, or he didn't feel good enough to petition and went into his father's trade as a fisherman. So here's a guy who is being offered this position from a man who's just performed this miraculous miracle, who he doesn't feel worthy of, and Jesus says, you are anyway, come on, let's go. So he leaves everything and follows Jesus. Matthew or Levi, we see a similar pattern. Matthew, the story of Matthew, can be found in Matthew 9, Mark 2, and Luke 5. For consistency today, we are going to stick in the Luke 5 passage. Luke 5 is one of the places he is referred to as Levi. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, follow me. And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. And Levi made a great feast at his house. And there was a large company of tax collectors, and others reclined at the table with them. And the Pharisee and their scribes grumbled at his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. A couple of things here. First and foremost, some of us have probably heard this before, but for those of us who hadn't, tax collectors weren't popular. Surprise, surprise. Tax collectors, the way that they made their money, is so say the Roman government said, everybody owes me $10. Well, the tax collector would go out and say, hey, you owe $15. Tax collector pockets 5, 10 goes to the Roman government. So in a way, they were kind of a traditional extortionist, right? The way that the tax collector made their money is by charging over and above what you actually owed. Not popular in the community. Not only that, but Matthew, being a Jew, had signed up to collect taxes for the oppressive Roman government. He was really sitting high in everybody's, and I'm inviting him to all my parties, right? Everybody was really jazzed about him. So he was actually probably considered and seen as a traitor to his people, to his nation, and to his religious group. Matthew was not well loved in his community. And here again, Jesus says, "Follow me." Jesus calls Matthew over all these other people. Jesus says, "Follow me." And when Jesus goes to sit and eat at Matthew or Levi's house, the Pharisees and the scribes, which would have been another pretty lofty position at the time, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? The Pharisees, the scribes, the people of importance in his community did not feel like Matthew was worthy to be with Jesus either. But Matthew, again, knowing the context, knowing that if he'd ever wanted to do this, his chance was gone. Having a rabbi, having a teacher, a respected teacher, come up and say, "Follow me," defying the custom, defying the rules of the system, the way this traditionally worked, he gets up and leaves everything and follows. Now, a little side note, Jesus defies culture when it's important and when the culture is doing it wrong. Jesus doesn't defy culture just to defy culture. Jesus probably wore traditional rabbinical robes, right? Jesus is pushing boundaries, but he's not just arbitrarily pushing boundaries. He's not just doing things to defy things. He's doing things because things aren't the way he wants them to be, right? And one of the things he's going to come and pick, regardless of their background, right? Maybe because of, maybe in spite of, but he picks these people intentionally. Matthew, we know he's a tax collector. Like I said, not well loved in his community. Seen as unworthy. And again, Jesus asked him. Jesus went out of his way, went and found Matthew, and asked him, not the other way around. Oh. That's the reaction I expected. It's cool, it's fine. So this is me, circa 7th grade, and I'm looking super cool, obviously. The reason normally I put this picture up because it kind of brings people's guard down, right? Especially when I'm working with middle schoolers or kids. It kind of shows, I was an awkward, dorky kid too, but today I show this. Don't feel bad for laughing. It's a funny picture, all right? But today I show this because in a lot of ways, the 7th grader is still who I talk to in the mirror. All of the insecurities, all the struggles I had with myself and my self-worth that I had in this picture, I still carry with me today. I was not confident. Girls were not lining up to ask me out on dates, right? I'm blonde, I bleached my hair because I thought that would make me cool, right? And that shirt, that's a choice, I tell you what. But I carry the 7th grader with me everywhere I go. We moved around a lot when I was younger, and I didn't really feel like I fit in. A lot of times I felt stupid because I'd missed a course. I still don't know if I have my multiplication tables memorized because we moved every time we got to that section in school. he's still with me. And I still struggle. And I learned as I got older, I learned to put on an air of confidence. And sometimes I was confident, and sometimes I was just pretending. But I learned that it didn't really matter. People like you if you're confident, right? So if I pretended, it made me more affable and friendly, and people liked that. So even if I was screaming on the inside, I learned how to fake it. But the story of calling the disciples, choosing these very, very unlikely candidates, Jesus calls them, speaks to the 7th grade boy in me. The 7th grade boy who says, "Get away from me, oh Lord, I'm not worthy." And God says, "Follow me anyway." Jesus called the 12 not because they were worthy, but because he loved them and he saw what was in their hearts. He saw their value, and he had a plan, he had a vision grander for them than they could have ever imagined. And he trains them and he teaches them, and then he says, guess what? I am not just here for the Jew, I'm here for the Gentile. I'm here for everyone who's willing to listen. Because I have a plan, I have a vision, I have something for them, I have something for them that they couldn't imagine. I have a work for them to do, and I am building a place for them with me in heaven. And the 7th grade boy in me melts. And I don't know if I ever totally feel worthy, but I know that God sees me as worthy despite my insecurities, despite my failures, despite the things that I did. Matthew, as a tax collector, had committed a huge social crime against his community. Something in Peter's life made him feel not worthy. And Jesus said, I see you. So much more than you will ever understand. Lord Father in heaven, I want to thank you that you chose those 12. That you knew better than the world and the society that they were in. And you sent them out so eventually I could hear that just like them, even though I didn't feel worthy, you love me and you've called me.